Stanford Neurodiversity Project, developing inclusive vocational education and resources for success in employment. The purpose of this module is to educate providers for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities on foundational knowledge and topics related to IDD, including: why learn about IDD? What you need to know about IDD laws, assent and consent person-centered planning. Section 1, why learn about IDD?
To promote inclusion and equity, by understanding IDD, we can promote and support inclusivity and equal rights for individuals with IDD and help foster a more diverse and supportive society. To be inclusive and more supportive. It's not about changing the person with IDD, we need to change. For successful inclusion, the more we understand the needs of the person as a team and adapt together, the more we can find ways to include them in the community. To challenge stereotypes and misconceptions. Learning about IDD helps break down stereotypes, misconceptions, and discrimination towards individuals with IDD. It promotes a more accurate perception and understanding. When people think about people with IDD, they think about someone who can't do it, who is incapable. IDD covers a huge range of conditions. Assumptions are often wrong and misconceptions. It is important to teach the correct knowledge. It is important that people learn about IDD because knowledge will replace misconceptions, generalizations, and bias. Most of the people that have preconceived notions about IDD have never really learned about or worked with a person with disabilities. When you see an individual, not a presumption, you will see their potential and their equal worth. To provide support and empathy, learning about IDD supports empathy and understanding about the distinct needs of each individual. It enables us to recognize their unique challenges, strengths, and needs, and offer appropriate support and accommodations. One must understand and experience an individual's struggles and difficulties with them to show empathy. In doing so, the support provider can learn more about how best to adapt the environment to better support the client and ensure their strengths are best utilized within the workplace. Learning about individuals with IDD is the first step in understanding their needs and designing the right supports for their success. People should learn about IDD so they can understand how discrimination affects us while empathizing. By expanding their perspectives, they can understand that we are people and not just classified by disability alone. To enhance professional practice and effective communication, for professionals working with people with IDD, knowledge is essential. Understanding IDD allows us to communicate more effectively with individuals who have these disabilities. It helps us adapt our communication styles, use accessible language, and employ alternative communication methods, such as visual aids or sign language, to ensure meaningful interaction and participation. So they know what to expect from the individuals they are working with. As you learn more personal traits of your client, you will be equipped to tailor their job supports and create a path for work success. To empower support workers to be the best advocate. For example, job coaches should understand what IDD is to help them adapt, understand, and communicate effectively. With this knowledge, support workers like job coaches can best represent their clients. Services can be tailored that align with the perfect job fit for their clients. Communication, collaboration, and education for successful job placement relies on supports from the employer, job coach, and person with IDD. To foster inclusive education and employment. Learning about IDD informs educators and employers about different learning styles and instructional strategies that can benefit students and employees with IDD. It helps create inclusive classrooms and workplaces where people of all diversities can thrive, receive appropriate support, and achieve their full potential. They are far too often left behind and not included or employed. It is our obligation as a community for inclusion, and the better we understand their needs, their barriers, the better we can adapt and adopt ways to include them. Learning about IDD is the foundation of promoting inclusion, diversity, equity, and access in special education.
For advocacy and policy development, Understanding IDD equips us to advocate for the rights, needs, and inclusion of individuals with disabilities at a societal level. It helps in shaping policies, laws, and regulations that protect disability rights, promote accessibility, and allocate resources to support their well-being and full participation in society. People learning about IDD become allies of the disability justice movement and stop acts of discrimination against individuals with disabilities by intervening whenever they witness discrimination. Nothing about us, without us. In summary, learning about IDD is crucial for nurturing a more inclusive, compassionate, and equitable society where individuals with disabilities are valued, supported, and empowered to live meaningful and fulfilling lives. Section 2. What do you need to know about IDD? IDD stands for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. It is a broad term used to describe a range of conditions that affect an individual's cognitive functioning and adaptive skills. These conditions commonly include intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. The condition and situation of each individual with IDD can vary widely, even within these specific conditions. IDD typically manifests during childhood or early developmental stages and persists throughout an individual's life. The cause of IDD involves a variety of factors, such as genetics, prenatal exposure to toxins or infections, complications during pregnancy or birth, certain medical conditions, environmental factors, and other unknown factors. There are also certain myths that exist about what causes IDD. For example, scientists have disproven the idea that autism is caused by vaccines. It is important to remember that IDD encompasses a wide spectrum of conditions and challenges. Some individuals with IDD can lead relatively independent lives with appropriate support and accommodations. Others may require more extensive support and assistance in their daily lives. The diagnosis of IDD depends on the particular condition, but is often based on a comprehensive assessment that considers an individual's cognitive functioning, adaptive behavior, and the onset of conditions during the developmental period. Some conditions, such as Down syndrome and cerebral palsy, amongst others, may be diagnosed using medical and genetic testing or medical imaging techniques. People with IDD may have co-occurring conditions, such as seizures, sleep difficulties, allergies, digestive issues, attention issues, sensory differences, communication difficulties, motor coordination disorders, anxiety, and other mental health disorders. It is important to consider and address these additional needs when providing support. Cognitive and adaptive functioning of IDD. Cognitive and adaptive functioning are two key components in assessing and understanding someone with IDD. Cognitive functioning refers to a person's general cognitive abilities, including thinking, reasoning, problem-solving, learning, memory, and attention. Individuals with IDD often experience varying degrees of limitations in cognitive functioning. Adaptive functioning refers to a person's skills and abilities to effectively navigate and cope with the demands of everyday life, such as independent living, communication, self-care, social interaction, problem-solving, and decision-making. Individuals with IDD often show limitations in adaptive functioning, which can affect their ability to perform daily activities without supports. It's important to note that cognitive and adaptive functioning assessments only provide a snapshot of an individual's abilities at a given time and within their ability to be tested. Individuals with IDD can possess unique strengths, talents, and potential for growth and development. Supports to individuals with IDD tend to focus on addressing their specific cognitive and adaptive needs, building on their strengths and interests to improve their well-being and quality of life. Life experience of IDD including discrimination, prejudice, stigma. When people think about people with IDD, they think about someone who can't do it, who is incapable. People with IDD often experience various forms of stigma, prejudice, and discrimination from society, which tend to cause marginalization, dependency, and exclusion. Now, Picture yourself as an individual with IDD. What differences would that make to your childhood, school years, and adult life? Imagine having to face discrimination, prejudice, and stigma at a young age. Imagine being the target of bullying and harassment, both in person and online. Imagine being denied education opportunities or treated unfairly by teachers and schools because of your condition. Imagine feeling isolated from society because you can't access resources, transportation, information, or communicate like most people because of your condition. Imagine having limited access to employment opportunities, which, as a result, puts you in an economic disadvantage, making it more difficult to lead an independent and fulfilling life. Addressing this discrimination, prejudice, and stigma requires collective efforts from society, such as raising awareness, promoting inclusive policies and practices, and fostering a culture of acceptance and respect. But it also comes down to individual efforts from people like you and me to provide support and training to empower individuals with IDD to achieve success in employment and various aspects of life. Now, let's see a real-life example. In school, Lori was often signaled out from classmates while taking tests or assigned homework. This led to teasing and bullying and a sense of embarrassment. As an adult, Lori is not willing to reveal their disability to their employer in fear of being viewed as different or incapable of completing their work. This led to Lori struggling to cope with job duties, becoming stressed and sometimes even failing to complete tasks. The consequence being a lack of promotion and job growth, derision from coworkers, and overall lower sense of life satisfaction. Section 3: Laws and Legal Concepts Related to IDD.
Individuals with IDD have the same fundamental rights as anyone else, such as the right to education, healthcare, employment, and participation in community life. There are several laws and legal concepts that protect the rights and equal opportunities for individuals with IDD. Here are some key ones to be aware of. Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA is a federal law in the United States that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in various areas of public life. It ensures equal access to employment, public accommodations, transportation, telecommunications, and state and local government services. Reasonable accommodations in the workplace. One aspect of the ADA has to do with reasonable accommodations to the workplace. This means that employees and job applicants with disabilities have the legal right to receive accommodations at work upon request, as long as the accommodation does not impose undue hardship to the employer, such as significant financial resources or difficulty. These modifications to the typical work environment allow people with disabilities to have equal opportunities to be employed at the same level as their peers. We will provide examples of potential accommodations for people with IDD in a later module. Guardianship and supported decision-making. Guardianship is a legal concept that grants one person the authority to make decisions on behalf of another person who is unable to make decisions independently. However, there is a growing movement towards supported decision-making, which emphasizes providing individuals with disabilities the necessary support to make their own decisions, rather than taking away their decision-making capacity through guardianship. Assent and consent. Assent and consent are important considerations when obtaining the participation or agreement of individuals with IDD in various situations. Assent refers to the affirmative agreement or willingness expressed by an individual with IDD to participate in a decision or activity. Assent is often used to recognize the person's right to be involved and have a say in matters that affect them, even if they are not legally capable of providing informed consent due to their cognitive limitations. It is particularly relevant in situations such as research studies, medical treatments, or educational decisions where the person's perspective is valued, even if ultimate decision-making authority rests with parents, guardians, or other legally authorized individuals. Consent, on the other hand, refers to the voluntary and informed agreement given by an individual who has the legal capacity to understand the nature and implications of a decision or activity. Consent implies a comprehensive understanding of the situation, its risks and benefits, alternatives, and the ability to make a rational decision based on that understanding. The specific requirements for obtaining assent or consent may vary depending on local laws, cultural norms, and the nature of the person's condition. In cases where individuals with IDD have limited capacity to provide assent or consent, legal guardians, family members, or appointed advocates often play a role in making decisions on their behalf, considering the person's best interests and in accordance with applicable laws and regulations.
Section 4. Person-centered planning in IDD. Person-centered planning is an approach used in many fields to empower individuals with disabilities to make decisions and actions that reflect their values and aspirations. It recognizes that individuals with IDD should have control over their own lives and be active participants in making plans or decisions about their lives. Person-centered planning places the person at the center of the planning process and supporting them in achieving various goals and activities in life. The planning process is a collaborative process that involves the individual with IDD, their support network, and professionals involved in their care. However, at the center of this process is the person with IDD. Therefore, PCP should take into account when the individual support network disagrees with or unintentionally limits the desires and abilities of the individual with IDD. Unless there are legal barriers or other mitigating circumstances, the individual with IDD's directives come first and should be respected. PCP takes a strength-based approach that focuses on identifying and building upon the individual's strengths, skills, and abilities. Everyone has unique talents and capacities that can be harnessed to support their goals and aspirations. PCP helps individuals identify their goals and aspirations, then supports them in developing steps and strategies to achieve their goals while taking into account any necessary supports or accommodations. Successful PCP is dependent on knowing the person and recognizing their unique preferences, interests, needs, and strengths. You will learn more about PINs as you continue this training. In this video, you've learned the importance of learning about IDD, understanding individuals with IDD, laws, assent and consent concepts related to IDD, and key factors to the person-centered planning.